Now we move on to group spokesmen. First of all, Elmar Brok on behalf of the European People's Party.
President of Council, President of Commission, ladies and gentlemen, Brexit is bad for us all. It's the negotiations about limiting damage limitation. I hope that we'll make progress, and I'm thankful that the unity of the EU and the institutions and the member states is there, and that's down to Michel Barnier, who's been discussing things transparently with us. My group will vote in favour of the draft withdrawal agreement, and the conditions discussed in December must be fulfilled when it comes to open borders for Ireland, the question of finances and citizens' rights. And it's right to have a transitional system if the UK is prepared for a further 21 months or however long it will be to recognise the four freedoms and the finances and the ECJ. That's the preconditions for negotiating a free trade agreement. It's always said in the German Industry Federation that there should be a customs union. I'm in favour of a customs union, but the UK must fulfil the conditions. They've rejected the customs union and a Norwegian solution of the single market, and so what we're left with is negotiating a trade agreement. And I think that's a trade agreement with a third country. I think it's right that Theresa May has conceded that if you don't fulfil European standards, you have less access to the European single market, with all the consequences of a smaller partner, as the UK will be. This attempt to pluck out various sectors and to have full access is cherry-picking. And the UK just wants sectors where they have particular interests. That's not on. If you want, if you leave a golf club and you still want to play, you must pay a green fee. The member states pay fees and meet the commitments, and that's an important point that we must agree on here. A final point. President Trump took measures against Bombardier in the UK, and now he's imposing steel and aluminium sanctions against Europe. It's only if we all stand together, including the British, we have a chance to counter that policy. So the unity of Europe in such issues is a question of survival of Europe. And Mr. Farage that must realise that he's taking his country down the wrong direction.
On behalf of the Socialist Group, Mr. Gualtieri.
Signor Presidente,
Thank you, President. The resolution we'll be voting on tomorrow shows that there's a broad degree of agreement between the Parliament and the other institutions on the key points of these difficult negotiations. And supporting the actions of Mr. Barnier and his team, I'd like to pay tribute to him for the amazing work that he's put in and the great institutional sensitivity that he's shown. We're now at a decisive moment in this titanic effort, trying to make certain there's an orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom and reduce the negative impact as far as possible. As has always been the case, we will be constructive but demanding as well. First of all, the December agreement needs to be put into legal terms so that citizens' rights are fully preserved, and that should apply also to the most vulnerable people. And the UK should guarantee that no single citizen be deprived unjustly of his or her rights. So the draft treaty that we think is good needs to be further enhanced. Equally important is to avoid hardening the border in Ireland. You can't criticise the responsible solution put forward by the Commission. It's up to the UK government to come up with convincing proposals itself, and that's not happened up till now. Secondly, The transition needs to make certain that all of the acquis communautaire is preserved and there be no discrimination towards citizens. That's quite unacceptable. We won't allow that goods be treated better than individuals. Thirdly, when it comes to the future, we want the UK and the EU to have the closest and broadest possible partnership, and we are proposing that this be defined in an association agreement framework. But these relations should be balanced as when it comes to rights and duties, and should make sure that the internal market is still preserved, the union's legal order is preserved, and that financial security is protected. We are sad to note that Ms May has ruled out the customs union and the single market, and if the UK government looks again at that position, we'd be very happy to discuss more close economic relations with them. If it's not the case, though, we'll work for a trade agreement which will reduce barriers to a minimum, in particular when it comes to the movement of goods, but can't, of course, remove barriers completely. One should clarify that the European Union can't delegate to others the control of its own customs borders, and that outside the single market there's no mutual recognition of rules. Another thing is regulatory cooperation or alignment. When it comes to financial services, smart use of the present equivalent system is possible. But we will not accept forms of social, environmental or tax dumping. The European Union needs to be something that stands up to protectionism, but does protect its citizens, its workers and the environment. That's the challenge which globalisation has faced us with, and we will be consistent with that vision when it comes to negotiations with the UK. Thank you.
A nome del gruppo dei conservatori.
On behalf of the ECR group, Mr Van Dalen.
Voorzitter, de Brexit kent.
Thank you, President. Brexit is going to only create a losing side on both sides of the channel. We've seen the draft text, and we've also heard that all regions of the United Kingdom of Great Britain will suffer as a result of Brexit, other areas of the economy as well. In Ireland as well, this is going to come at a cost of billions. The German central bank last week has said that Brexit will cost about 9 billion of the country. We now have a document that has been drafted, the draft guidelines by President Tusk, and that the European Union wishes to maintain the status quo in certain areas, Erasmus, aviation, fisheries, the area of security, and trade in goods. And I think this is the line that has to be followed. And I would send out an appeal to the negotiators so that they do try and be as balanced as possible and not put a knife to anybody's throat during the negotiations. The fishermen have to be able to continue to fish, our companies have to be able to import and export, and our citizens, young citizens, have to be able to continue to study on both sides of the border, of all borders. We don't want a hard Brexit. I think what we need is a Brexit that is balanced and on the basis of common sense and reason.
Every group will have a chance to speak. There's no point making off-mic comments. Mr Verhofstadt, on behalf of the ALDE group.
Thank you, President. Before coming to Brexit and to thank Michel Barnier, I take this opportunity, Jean-Claude, to tell you that your former head of cabinet yesterday has done something what nobody has done ever before here in this House, to unite the whole Parliament, the left and the right. But it's not a joke only. Maybe you have to sort this out, because you know it. I have no problem with Martin Zalmaier. I think he's a very dedicated European. I think he's a very competent civil servant. No, a problem that we have is with the way the Commission handled this. And so something you have to do about this in any way, because it's bad for Europe and bad for the European Commission. But that said, it's not only we that have to sort things out, the UK also, because as you have indicated, Jean-Claude, what the problem is today is that we don't have a proposal from the UK side on the future relationship of the Union. It's still lacking. And it's true what you have said. There was this Mansion House speech by Mrs. May, but it is mainly repeating the red lines that we know already 2 years. And I think that in this Mansion House speech, what the Prime Minister did was saying, look, we cannot accept the rights of Canada and then the obligations of Norway. Well, I have to tell you, I don't think that we have ever presented that proposal to the UK side. I think that the UK side have to understand that the opposite is also not possible. You cannot have the rights of Norway and then the obligations of Canada. That's also not possible. So I think that after all the speeches we have heard now, it's time that we go beyond what I should say the slogans, the sound bites, and that is exactly what we try to do in our resolution. It's a long resolution, more than 65 paragraphs, in which we present what I should call a concept, a vision, an architecture for the future, because that is what is lacking for the moment, and then an architecture, a vision that matches both sides. The red lines of the UK on the one hand, with the vision and the principles of the European Union at the other side. And what we do in the resolution, and that's a little bit different, can I say that to the Council, that is that we use the treaty for that. Article 8 and Article 217. Article 8 and 217 were saying, look, in the neighbourhood of the European Union, there you have to create a special partnership with your neighbours, and for that we create an association with that countries. So our proposal, dear colleagues, is to start negotiations on an association agreement between the UK and the EU based on 4 pillars, one on trade and economics, one on internal security, one on thematic cooperation, for example, research, Erasmus, things like that, and finally, one on the external security, the defence matters, because that's also, I think, a very important field of cooperation between both. And for every one of these 4 pillars, what we do in this resolution is giving the principles. What are the fields where we can cooperate? What are the different principles we have to apply? And in any way, what is the advantage of our proposal, and I hope that the Council will recognise that also in the coming days, that is that we create one overall governance structure. It's not an inflation of bilateral arrangements as we have with Switzerland, who will be the good basis for that special partnership, but one overall governance based on association. And I got the possibility last week to discuss it with David Davis, also the possibility to discuss it with the Prime Minister, and I'm quite confident that also ultimately Britain will see the advantages of such an approach, to have a decent, deep association partnership from both sides. And that brings me finally to the last paragraph of our resolution, the rights of all citizens. Personally, it's my feeling, colleagues, that we are very near to an agreement with the UK side on the citizens' rights. In fact, respecting the rights of the citizens that live there are EU citizens, and at the opposite also respect the rights of the UK nationals living on our continent, because this is in any way something that we have to achieve. Both sides, UK nationals and EU citizens, cannot be the victim of this whole Brexit aim and outcome. Thank you.
On behalf of the Green Group, Mr. Lamberts.
Dear Prime Minister May, this is neither the first nor the last time, I'm afraid, that I'll address you in this hemicycle, where you remain welcome at any time. Ever since you became Prime Minister, I've carefully listened to you on Brexit. I do acknowledge your wish to make the best out of the inconvenient situation the referendum has put your country in, but I'm still perplexed by the inner contradictions of your government's positions. Indeed, arguing that A, the United Kingdom will leave the single market and customs union, B, that the United Kingdom government will stand by its commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, and C, that there will be no new regulatory barriers within the United Kingdom, is a trilemma that cannot be solved. This has nothing to do with the alleged stubbornness of the EU27. It has everything to do with the stubbornness of facts. If regulatory divergence is real, it creates a border, and no magical thinking can ever erase it. Therefore, one of the three elements has to give, and I cannot imagine the British government giving up on or taking any risk with peace in Northern Ireland. Therefore, it has to be A or C. In our view, the only practical solution would be for the UK, or at least Northern Ireland, to remain fully in the single market and customs union. Taking into account your long relationship with us, and the fact that, of course, the UK would then have to apply EU law without being a part to the decision process, it would be fair to establish a privileged channel for your country to express concerns and suggestions. And I agree with you that we have to tailor the transition period to the practical imperatives rather than align it with any preset dates. The end of that transition should also be the cut-off date of any change in the status of citizens. And we do welcome, like Guy just did, the very significant progress made over the last few months in that respect. A few issues remain to be tackled, however: the non-reversibility of rights, the rights of European residents with disabilities, the status of future spouses, the rights of third country nationals, as well as voting rights. Our key concern is that no one ends up losing rights. If we want to be creative, we should consider basing citizens' rights on residence rather than on nationality, which may provide at the same time certainty and simplicity. Mrs. Prime Minister, one recognises a stateswoman by her ability not so much to be strong facing the other camp as to confront her adversaries in a round camp. Now is the time to be bold. Thank you.
On behalf of the Confederal Group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left, Ms. Zimmer.
Sehr geehrter Herr Juncker, sehr geehrter
Mr. Juncker, Mr. Barnier, in the course of the recent months, you'll have realized that our group has tried very intensively in the preparation of the Parliament's position on Brexit. We've done that because it's important that the rights of people, both in the UK, but also within the EU, and in particular in Northern Ireland, that these two negotiations aren't lost sight of and aren't misused by anybody in negotiations. I think on these issues we've made some progress. We can't compare it with the first starting points, but we'll ensure that the rights of residents and the right of freedom of movement for citizens of the UK within the EU must be taken account of. We'll have to think about that, because I think, for example, in the proposal that has been made for the draft of a withdrawal agreement, there are limitations regarding the rights of UK citizens in member states and payments for companies, and that's something that has to be worked upon. We'll ensure that the rights of citizens in Northern Ireland will be recognised. It isn't just about rights which can just be attributed. It's about all existing international agreements which we've signed up to, and democratic rights, social rights, and human rights that are defined. Another thing is clear. These rights will only be protected in the withdrawal agreement, nowhere else. That's why we need this withdrawal agreement. And we must work towards this withdrawal agreement and get those things in there. And we also realise when it comes to a mandate for the future relationship, there are the positions of the political parties for the future of the EU which play a role. So in our group, we identify various problems and various approaches in our resolution we reject, and we refer to the proposals on 21, 22, 23, 24, external relations, security relations, and cooperation there. We will be tabling amendments in that respect. Nonetheless, we decided that will go along with the resolution. It's important, as I said, for the continuation of the fight for the human rights, citizens' rights in the existing EU, but in the countries, regions involved in Brexit. Will be attentive that employees' rights will be protected better, and for immigrant workers, the question of cross-border workers. Here too, I think we must do more. There's a need here. We have a few things to do, and we are critical when it comes to the work of our group, when it comes to the rights of citizens, and that's something we'll continue.
On behalf of the EFDD group, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. 2/3 of the British people think the European Commission are trying to bully us in these negotiations. And of course they're right. The EU's bullying us, it bullies member states, it bullies its next door neighbours, it even bullies the third world with its neo-colonial policies. Well, of course it does, because the Europe of the Junckers, the Barniers, the Selmayrs is power without accountability. Well, at long last, you've met your match in Donald Trump. Now, you may well scream and shout about his aluminium and steel tariffs, but the EU puts tariffs on 13,000 goods coming into it, meaning that shoes and bras and food are more expensive for simple, ordinary folk who don't understand this, because it's never been properly explained to them. And the sheer hypocrisy of criticising Trump when you already have put tariffs on steel and aluminium amazes me. But it does show the folly of us going for a transition period. It shows the utter stupidity of the Labour Party wanting to sign us up to this permanently, because in this USA dispute we now find ourselves trapped, impotent, unable to act. We need to be free. We voted Brexit. We voted to make our own trade policy, our own trade decisions. We could do a deal with America in 48 hours. We need to act. Yes, well, just yesterday, the Trump administration were describing us as their best ally in the world. Mrs May, we did not vote for a transition period. We voted to leave this organisation. We voted to leave the customs union. We voted to leave the single market. So please, Mrs May, at this summit next week, do what Trump has done. Stand strong against the European Commission, against the unelected bullies. And bearing in mind the Italian elections, and weren't they wonderful, folks? It's pretty obvious the game is up anyway, so she'll be doing not just the British people a favour, but the whole of Europe too.
For the ENF group, Ms. Atkinson.
Well, I agree with Nigel. This debate is rather pointless, just like Mr Gualtieri said. You know, it's like the Titanic, it's sinking very fast. The resolution is the federalist delight, and it's business as usual here. Yet all around you, Rome burns, literally. The populists are winning elections, kicking out the old guard, the very people who wrote this resolution. Across the southern EU states, there is horrifically high youth unemployment. In Italy, nearly 70% of the youth actually voted for populist parties. Yet you come up with this framework that actually just reflects the old order, not the new. However, I do detect a realisation that trying to punish the UK will damage your economies too. And when I was in America, in Washington in December, Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of State for Commerce, said to me, don't take that poison pill that the EU offers us if you want a trade deal with us. And my friend Nigel Farage is absolutely right. We can get a deal together in 48 hours because we're two proud trading nations. You lot haven't got a clue. You're a protectionist racket. That's what Trump told you, and that's what Wilbur Ross told you, and that's what you are.
Obviously, there are differences of opinion here. Ms. James, from the non-attached members.
Good morning, Chamber. Well, you've heard from two United Kingdom speakers. You're now going to hear from a third, and a fervent Brexiteer. and one who's very, very pleased at the position the United Kingdom is taking and the fact that it's prepared to say no to the European Union, that we do not wish to continue being a vassal state. The bullies in this chamber, and there are two of them at least, I'm not going to bother to name them, they've already been named, but could they take some very clear messages back, please? One, the United Kingdom does not wish to be a vassal state, and we really take exception to being told that we should continue having the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, that we should continue to be under the onerous single market and customs union regulations, because quite frankly, Brexit means Brexit. And if you want to make Brexit hard, be aware actions have consequences. And for you, European Union, the consequences will be very, very tough and very negative for you. Thank you.
Our next speaker for 1.5 minutes is Mr. González Pons.
We still don't know what kind of relationship the UK wishes to have with us in the future, and we don't know what consequences Brexit will have for the British real economy. We don't even know if there's going to be a second referendum. If you take a look at the rural population of the UK, they think Brexit's already happened, but the City of London thinks it'll never happen at all. I think the only certain fact that we know from the UK government is that they want to be outside the customs union, the single market, the financial passporting rules. They want to remain outside of any kind of financial support and the kind of world that they participate in now. And what about the 1.5 million UK citizens living in Spain who are not going to be able to take part in elections and vote for the mayors in where they're living locally in Spain next year? We only have 1 year to have a balanced agreement, and I don't think any Brexit agreement can be a good one. And as I said, we only have 1 year, which is to arrive at an agreement which isn't that detrimental to either side. And we've heard from the UK government that maybe the worst of agreements is better than chaos. And unfortunately, the European Union, it is true, will be incomplete without the United Kingdom, but a United Kingdom completely outside the European Union will be lost. And chaos and magical thoughts is not any kind of policy. And even I learned that from the glorious history and past of Great Britain.
Thank you. Mr. Corbett, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. The emerging position of the EU 27 and the resolution that we have before us in Parliament today cannot be a surprise to the UK government. They respond, in fact, to the ambiguities and the contradictions in that government's position. The biggest ambiguity of all is the idea that you can have frictionless trade with the rest of Europe while leaving the customs union and the single market. Colleagues, the single market and the customs union are precisely the tools with which our countries have organised frictionless trade across Europe. You can't walk out from them, abandon them, and still have frictionless trade. And the customs union also is a vital question when it comes to the Northern Ireland border. All of us are waiting with bated breath to hear how you can turn that border into a customs border but not have any customs controls. How do you do it? How can it be done? Electronically. So all these nice wizardry things. That, I think they want to send Harry Potter to find out some solution to this border. The leaked government figures, by the way, show that this solution would reduce UK GDP by 4.5% over the next decade. No wonder they wanted to keep those figures quiet, and how embarrassed they were when they leaked out. No, there will be deadlock, I fear, in these negotiations, which will continue for so long as we have a government in Britain that is divided internally, that has no majority in its own parliament, and which continues to lose public support on this issue. It's time for a change within Britain if these issues are going to be properly addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For 1 minute, Mr. Henkel.
Last week, the CEO of the port of Dover went to Brussels and presented his view of Brexit. And he made it very clear that if the trucks, 10,000 trucks going in and out of Dover every day, are only held up by 2 minutes because of Brexit, there would be a 17 miles queue outside Dover, an equivalent chaos in Dunkirk and Calais. And yesterday, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung reported that Brexit alone cost Britain 32 billion euros a year because of bureaucracy and customs. And by the way, 37 billion euros will it cost to the remaining European countries. In other words, it is very clear Brexit remains a lose-lose situation. And what surprises me here, that almost everybody except the Brexiteers to my left here hate Brexit, but there is nobody in this House trying to stop it. And I think it is time, Mr. President, that you make Britain a new offer, an offer which Britain can't refuse, an offer which Britain gives what they always wanted. Let them give some more autonomy over their immigration, and let's keep them in the European Union.
Madam Sharanova, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. We have now reached the crucial point in negotiations. We all need to know, and especially businesses, under which terms we will be able to cooperate in the future. What is the best scenario? To keep the UK within the internal market, to preserve the most of the benefits that we have created with the UK together. Fact that the UK refuses that is a fatal mistake. Any other option is simply worst and will build new barriers for the EU companies, but also for the British companies. And for some businesses, and especially SMEs, this new situation will be very hard to cope with. Then the worst possible outcome is having absolutely no deal. It would not allow for any transitional period, and it would just sever our mutual relations. It would degrade the EU-UK partnership to a level inferior to what we currently have with Turkey or even with China. And I don't think neither side wishes that. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Scott-Cato, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. As a British MEP, I'm experiencing both sides of the Brexit negotiations, and what makes me really sad is that it's the European side that is active in protecting citizens' rights and environmental standards, while the Tories are using Brexit to ride roughshod over them. I notice this especially in the area of tax, the main area of my work here in the Parliament, and where our resolution makes clear that the UK will not achieve a trade deal with the EU unless we match European standards in the fight against tax avoidance and money laundering. So I'm glad that my work here on tax won't be wasted, but I'm sad that I must use my role as an MEP to protect these high standards in the UK after Brexit. The situation is similar with citizens' rights, where my own government did little to defend our interests, as though the 1 million British people who work in the EU or have European partners or children just don't matter to them. Brexit is a clear example of ideology triumphing over reason, and as such it is the epitome of bad government.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Spinelli, please.
Grazie.
Thank you, Madam President. Recently, Donald Tusk said something that was correct but didn't go far enough. Discussions on relations between the two sides won't work unless the UK offers the citizens of Northern Ireland something which protects their rights to be protected under the law of the EU, as well as protecting the Good Friday Agreement. It's important that negotiations continue on the key issue of European citizenship, something which can't be forgotten by anybody here. The withdrawal agreement needs to be improved by the autumn. Neither the people of Northern Ireland nor European citizens in the United Kingdom or English people resident in the EU, a total of 6 million altogether, need to be taken out of the state of anxiety in which they're living at the moment. Issues of European citizenship need to be preserved, ring-fenced in good time and ring-fenced effectively. They should never be subordinated to other chapters in the negotiations. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr Batten, 1 minute.
Now, we've had the Commission's draft withdrawal agreement. We've had Mrs May's response. The Commission wants unconditional surrender, and Mrs May will settle for conditional surrender. The EU referendum was brought about and won by the UK Independence Party, and UKIP's position is no surrender. When the British people voted to leave, they voted to take back control. No more money to the EU, no more EU laws imposed upon us, no more open borders. Brexit must mean exit. Now, our future relationship with the EU will be one of trade, friendship and cooperation, something that UKIP has argued for the last 25 years. We will not accept subservience to the EU. We want full independence and the return to our former status as an independent democratic nation state. Thank you.
Mr Pretzel, 1 minute, please.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, in this House, you've said on many occasions that Brexit for the UK will have catastrophic consequences for the UK. First of all, Brexit still has to happen on the basis of the attitude of the EU and based on the attempt to deepen this union further. Let's come back to the forecasts. This 19-page document, half of it deals with how one can prevent the UK having the same advantages as other states within the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, if Great Britain will be better off because of the withdrawal, why do you have such fears of the UK coming out better if you don't prevent it? And that's what it's about for you in this debate. And that's dishonest to conduct this debate on that basis. We have common interests. We should make sure that we can have trade together in future. And, ladies and gentlemen, with a bit of goodwill, that will be possible.
1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. This morning, we have heard of the European Union's desire for a close partnership with the UK post-Brexit. Yet, there is no spirit of conciliation and compromise. And nowhere is this more evident than in the draft legal text on Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which this resolution supports. This is aggressive interference in the internal affairs of the United Kingdom. It would be disastrous for Northern Ireland economically. It violates the principle of consent, a core principle of the Belfast Agreement, and it goes well beyond the Belfast Agreement in its North-South proposals. In fact, it is a text that no British Prime Minister could agree to. It has achieved the seemingly impossible of uniting the British Parliament against it. Last week, my party told Monsieur Barnier that we wanted practical solutions on the border. These proposals are a very far step away from it.
1.5 minutes, Madam Hübner.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, now that we are moving toward the future relationship, it becomes even clearer that withdrawal of the UK from the Union is not a one-off event, and it didn't happen as some people believe. It is a lengthy, law-based, law-driven process based on both legal and political grounds and with far-reaching consequences for the life of people. We are all involved, institutions, states, citizens and businesses. Yes, you need unity remains crucial, but also listening to each other. European Parliament will be providing consent at the end of this process. The Constitutional Affairs Committee responsible for the institutional consequences of withdrawal and consent procedure will continue to be an open platform for hearings, debates, meetings with experts, citizens, all stakeholders concerned. But we have to remember that we have also Article 8 in the Treaty on the European Union, according to which the Union shall develop a special relationship with neighbouring countries as close as possible in the interest of all our citizens and businesses, and founded on the values of the Union and characterised by close and peaceful relations based on cooperation. This week will bring the withdrawal agreement, including transition, agreed among the EU27, endorsed by the European Parliament. The European Council will decide next week on additional guidelines on the future relationship, and we will vote on our expectations regarding the future in tomorrow's resolution. Hopefully, all that will allow to enter into formal negotiations as soon as possible. It is true that the clock has not stopped ticking, but there is also still time for the UK to rethink the red lines. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Lange.
Thank you very much, Madam President, President of the Commission, and President of Council. If it's the case that Britain would like to be a third state, third country, I think we should negotiate properly with a third country. We must make sure that the UK, that we have a level playing field which is retained. For example, in the question of regulatory cooperation or subsidies, we must start to talk about a free trade agreement after the transition agreement with the three elements, and customs, regulatory cooperation, that we don't drift apart, and in terms of the rules. So the question of intellectual property, etc., that must be tackled as quickly as possible. And I can only call on the British government to stop top thumping and to get real and to start substantive agreements, substantive negotiations.
Mr. Krasnodowski, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you, President. I'd just like to recall that we need Great Britain to the same degree that Great Britain needs the European Union. Our future relationship, therefore, has to be a deep relationship, and we have to strive for ambitious solutions rather than leaving this at the level of third country cooperation, because, of course, we have to look at defence, security and our border policy. And I think we have to put an end to trying to sanction the United Kingdom and introduce more realism into the negotiations. And there's another point that I don't think anybody has mentioned. Brexit has been and is a chance for the European Union to give some thought to reforms which I think are needed to bring about greater decentralisation, greater transparency, and also to have the European Union based on the real values, the real European values. But this hasn't happened. We see proposals now which are only based on the results of the referendum. There isn't enough transparency about the workings of institutions, nothing about putting right mistakes, and then a lot of arrogance when it comes to the way these things have been put into practice.
President, thank you. Amidst all our talk, quite rightly, about the single market, the customs union, it is, I think, a point worth making, colleagues, that Scotland voted to remain within our European Union. That is our starting point, and that is our domestic issue, but we will be in touch. Don't forget about Scotland. But in this debate, I'd address my remarks to people outside of this chamber. The people in England, the people in the United Kingdom, I say as a friend of both, who voted leave. I get it. Your anger is justified. Your anger is real. But I assure you, your fight is not with the European Union. You were told you believed the promises. You were told by serious people like David Davis that there was no downside and a considerable upside to voting leave. Well, I tell you, dear friends, this is what the future looks like, and it's pretty bloody bleak. A diminished UK, a diminished Europe, a poorer citizenry, a poorer society, a poorer economy, Nobody voted to make themselves poorer. There are no unicorns, there are no windmills for every voter, there is no £350 million for the NHS. They lied to you. You were right. You were right. You were genuine to take those promises at face value. But as we get to the end point of this process, we see what the reality is. There is no shame in changing your mind. There is still time to change course. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Carthy.
The strength of this resolution on Ireland is to be welcomed. Every month since the Brexit referendum, there has been growing support for the Sinn Féin proposal that the north of Ireland requires special status to prevent the hardening of the border, to protect the Good Friday Agreement and to defend citizens' rights. Membership of the single market and the customs union for all of Ireland is essential. The British government has not presented a single realistic proposal on the Irish border. Their position, dictated by the DUP, is political lunacy that would harm unionist workers, students, businesses and farmers as much as their Republican counterparts. The backstop, while not perfect, provides some much-needed certainty. The British government actually signed up for this in December, and for once it's time for them to honour their word. Finally, the Irish people have confirmed time and time again they want to be part of the EU. But like citizens across Europe, they want a social, progressive, democratic EU. The ongoing drive for the further militarisation of Europe, including PESCO, is regressive and undermines the message of solidarity and peace that should be central to this Parliament's response to Brexit.
Thank you. Mr. de Graaf, 1 minute, please.
President, the EU should stop its warmongering between Ireland and the UK when it comes to the border with Northern Ireland. The Irish and the British will work it out together, as they did before. And you very well know that anything the EU touches becomes a filthy mess. Therefore, Mr. Juncker, back off and start working on a decent trade deal. A deal without trade with the UK, your already failed project will certainly go bankrupt. So make a deal without protectionism, a deal without tariff barriers, without EU jurisdiction, without full EU rights for EU citizens in the UK, a deal without free movement of people, a deal that fully respects the absolute sovereignty of the United Kingdom. Get on with it or be gone.
Mr. Wolf, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fear, dread, alarm, panic, terror, pain. That is all that you hear from those on that side of the House will occur to Britain once we leave the European Union. Not the positive message that we have campaigned for, one where Britain will be independent, looking outwardly to the rest of the world and still being friends with the European Union. And this paper that you present today is one more attempt at fear. But this fear is to try shackle Britain, undermine us. And the reality is, it's the European Union's fear of Britain. Fear of Britain succeeding. Fear of Britain leaving this club and doing well. But I will tell you, Britain has never feared looking forward to the future. We weren't in fear when we came to your aid from the times of Nazism to communism. We weren't fearful when we had to tackle our own economic problems. And we will not live in fear leaving outside of the European Union. We will embrace it and look forward to a bright future. So I think you ought to learn that lesson now.
Just bear with me 1 sec, colleagues. I've got a blue card, but I'm reluctant to open the blue card entirely. However, Mr. Frunzulică, you have 30 seconds, and I will use my judgment on time as to whether we can continue with these cards. So 30 seconds, please. Will you accept, first of all, Mr.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear colleague, I would like to ask you, because there are so many ties between the European Union and UK and the European Union are so much intertwined. Who is going to pay, all these costs of the Brexit if one day UK decides to come back within the European Union? You, the Brexiteers, are going to pay them?
What I will say to you is that Britain will not return to the European Union. What you will find is that more countries will want to leave the European Union, because when our economy is growing faster than yours, when our regulations are not imposing the costs on small businesses that you have, and when you finally realise it's actually politicians and democracy and the people that make the decisions over their lives, not unelected commissioners, then you will see that more of Europe will want to leave and join Brexit as well. Thank you.
Mr. Schöpflin, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam President. A key aspect of Brexit is the future relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom after the latter has become a third state. Now, the auguries are not encouraging. The Brexit vote has brought to the surface the very deep divisions in the UK. These are not new, but they have acquired saliency following on the Brexit vote. The first such division is deeply ideological, that between the intransigent Brexiteers and the committed Remainers. There's no common ground here. Then there are the cracks in what holds the country together. How united really are England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland? How much are they desirous of remaining in the same state, and if so, on what terms? There's a crisis in the British Constitution. Finally, there's the centre-periphery problem. You probably all know this. London and the southeast, well, that's a powerhouse. But the further north one goes, the weaker things are economically, in terms of status, aspirations and power. That's the way that peripheries work. Without a redistribution of power, of goods and status above all, the crisis of the United Kingdom will persist, and that signifies that the United Kingdom will be an uneasy partner for the European Union.
Thank you. Madam Beres, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. President of the Commission, Customs Union, Internal Market, these are basically things of the past as far as the UAE is concerned, because all we're going to have left is the association agreement as a guide for future relations. Let's be clear, that means that the passporting won't exist, and we'll just come up with equivalence, where of course proportionality needs to be integrated, but equivalence is a unilateral decision of the EU as to whether it's granted or not. So we all need to be aware that through the new association agreement to be negotiated with the United Kingdom, it'll be a kind of, we'll be guinea pigs, if you like. The new givens in an association agreement are changing. Just because it's the United Kingdom isn't, well, it's not just because it's United Kingdom, but it's because things have changed when it comes to these various regulations. And bearing in mind tax issues, these are all new elements which we'll be testing. As I say, we'll be guinea pigs in this agreement with the United Kingdom. And finally, we need fully to integrate into the negotiations the effects on third countries, because they will often want to continue relations with the EU as if Brexit hadn't taken place. But it will have an impact. We need to bear that in mind too. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Flack.
Thank you. Let us negotiate as equals. Do not try and bully us. We are not Norway or Canada. We've almost double the population of Canada and 10 times that of Norway. We are a true world power. We offer Europe friendship and cooperation, but be of no doubt, there will be an independent, free, prosperous British lion off your shores. You will not chain us. Do not be fooled by political has-beens coming from the UK like Blair and Clegg, desperate for publicity, acting as some sort of third column trying to stop Brexit. Or worse still, agree a deal that will leave the UK so weak we come back cap in hand in decades to come. Be of no doubt, that will not happen. We are offering you tens of billions of pounds in aid to plug the holes in your budget, just as my father and grandfather endured rationing in order that food could be sent to a starving mainland. We are your friends, your powerful friends, but do not push us too far. Thank you.
Mr. Flack, I think you pushed Mr. Smith a little too far. He wants to ask a question. Will you accept? Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, President, and indeed thank you, Mr Flack, for giving way and taking the blue card. And may I congratulate you for being the very first United Kingdom Conservative to actually contribute to this debate today. Does it not strike you as strange that all your colleagues who are acting as the midwife to the Brexit vote — we've heard plenty from the Brexiteers, the charlatans, the shysters, the useful idiots today — but you're the first United Kingdom Conservative, the government of the United Kingdom, to actually speak today? Do you not think you could have said something more than warm words, flannel and nonsense?
That you consider the offer of friendship and cooperation bad words. That's what the British Conservatives and the British people are offering. And the British Conservatives sit here as part of a very large and powerful ECR group. We are a diverse group with diverse views. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. I can see you. There's no need to wave your arms like you're swimming. I can see you. I think we need to reflect on this moment. There's an internal UK issue, so I will allow you a point of order if it is a point of order, but I will be strict if it's not. You have been warned. Thank you.
Madam Chair, most people in the Chair are not as observant as you, so may I congratulate you for that. Can I ask Mr Smith to please withdraw his remarks on Brexiteers? They're unparliamentary and demean this Parliament.
Just briefly, colleagues, please allow me. Mr Wolf, are you also looking to...
It's on.
Excuse me, your microphone wasn't on, Mr Wolf. Just go again, please.
Under the order of parliamentary language, I would ask Mr Smith to withdraw the use of the word shyster. As someone of Jewish heritage, he should fully aware and understand the power of that term and how demeaning it actually is.
I've taken note of your comments. Is there another point of order? Oh, third time. Go ahead.
Yeah, Madam President, sorry, when Mr Smith was speaking, I raised the green card and you ignored it. Are you being fair in this debate? You have been very vocal about the Irish board in the media. So can I please green card Mr Smith about that? It was relevant to the point he made.
Could I... Excuse me, colleagues, allow me to answer. Thank you, colleagues. First of all, I chair this totally as chairman, and I did not see your card, whatever colour it was. So you have to respect
this colour,
bona fides.
and your staff did.
Excuse
Madam
me, can I
President.
can I finish my point? Thank you for the apology. I'm trying to keep order on this debate, which is a very important debate for all our citizens. So if you are looking for a blue card during a blue card procedure, then I'll have to ask the services of what we can do in that regard. But I don't ignore anybody. If I don't see them myself, I hope my services do, and I hope the House accepts. You can speak when the microphone's on, sir, not when it's not. So bear with me for a moment. I take note of the comments of the other colleagues. I will not allow Mr Smith to respond because it will simply become a very debased debate. So let us move on to our next speaker, and I will consult the services on your point. For 1 minute, Madam Evans, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I Am European is the title of a campaign that my party, Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, launched last week, calling for people to have the ability to retain their EU citizenship after the UK leaves the EU. The petition received more than 5,000 signatures in just the first few days. And last Wednesday, the House of Commons debated and backed a Plaid Cymru motion on this. No one has the right to strip people of their citizenship against their will. That's the view of many legal experts, but that's what will happen unless there's action now, and it's a question of political will. I welcome the fact that this resolution again proposes that the EU27 examine how to mitigate the loss of rights of UK citizens, and I urge the Commission and the Council to recognise that for many, their European citizenship is also an essential part of their identity. Diolch. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Flanagan, 1 minute, please.
Ireland finds itself in an unenviable position, caught between two large powers, neither of whom history tells us we can trust. We were bullied for years by Britain, then bullied by the EU on Lisbon and Nice, bullied again on bank debt. It is because of this, I believe, that Ireland needs a seat on Michel Barnier's negotiating team. It is only in this scenario can we get the best possible deal for Ireland, both north and south. We hear support from Donald Tusk, support for Manfred Weber, so they tell us. But I hope it isn't just support because it suits them now, because we didn't get support from you in the past. During these negotiations, we've got to be pragmatic, we've got to work together, we've got to protect citizens' rights. We need to be positive. Statements such as "you will regret it" from Mr Juncker, I hope you mean that from the point of view of you won't make them regret it, but you think they will regret it, because we need this to work out. I'd like to hear more positive stuff, as we heard from Mr Galtieri, that we need to reduce the negative impact as much as possible. We need this to work. We need you all to grow up, stop fighting and support people.
Thank you. Just to respond to Mr Campbell-Bannerman, apparently I had given the floor to another speaker before the services saw your blue card. So let there be no doubt about my commitment to fairness in the chair, and I hope you accept that. And secondly, Mr Flanagan, there is a blue card request from Mr Rubik. Will you accept? Thank you, Mr Rubik. 30 seconds, please. Herr Rubik.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we've rightly recognised that if we have a hard Brexit, there are going to be enormous problems in Ireland. Could you imagine that within the financial framework of the European Union, we can envisage certain provisions to prevent greater loss in the event of these kind of problems in Ireland, and that we provide some kind of support to Ireland so that the disaster doesn't unfold as we fear today?
Will cost Ireland financially, and we do need support. And in that context, I would ask the European Union and the ECB to stop Ireland borrowing and burning money that the ECB is forcing us to do. Last year we borrowed 4 billion at the behest of the ECB and we burnt it into thin air. If the EU is to prove that it has solidarity towards Ireland and that it is our friend at a time when the ECB were engaging in quantitative easing, they've got to stop forcing us to get involved in quantitative squeezing.
And now we go to Mr Lenaers for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. In recent months, Mr Juncker, Mr Tusk and Mr Barnier sounded more and more like the Spice Girls. Please, UK, tell us what you want, or what you really, really want. Because it's been 627 days since the referendum, and we have mostly heard from the UK what they do not want, because somehow a very narrow referendum result led to a blueprint of a hard Brexit, where the UK cannot stay in the single market, cannot stay in the customs union, cannot have a customs union, and cannot have a Norway or a Canada deal. Mrs May wants to take back control of laws, money and borders, but at the same time speaks of the most comprehensive trade deal ever, with frictionless trade and no border in Ireland. Where is the sense of reality? Her speech last week was an opportunity to, after 2 years, provide and to paint a realistic picture. Instead, Mrs May again limited herself to empty slogans, carefully drafted to hold together a divided cabinet and a divided Tory party. Still desperately trying to present Brexit as a win-win situation, while asking for many more cakes to have and eat and many more cherries to pick. And I'm glad that this House today states that that is a completely unacceptable position. It is time for Mrs May to stop confusing the Brexit negotiations with Conservative Party management and to start developing a credible and serious negotiation position. Let's get on with that.
Madam Bresso, 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to come back to the proposal that Parliament's made to use the association agreement framework to define relations with the UK after they leave. The experience of what happened with Switzerland has shown us that a multiplication of bilateral agreements is almost impossible to manage. So I think that this is a decent proposal. I'd like to understand from Mr. Barnier, our negotiator, therefore, how he sees this. Does he think it's possible to do it? And what should the framework be? How does he see it applied? Particularly, I'm thinking about the idea of some kind of bilateral commission which would run the whole issue of the governance of any agreements reached. And secondly, I'd like to ask Mr. Barnier, how are the negotiations going on the status of UK and EU citizens after the UK has left? We're worried about people who are there now, but what happens afterwards? Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Mr. Hayes, is it a blue card or a catch the eye? Thank you. Our next speaker, Madam Tomatic. 1 minute, please.
Hvala lijepa. Pregovori o novim odnosima.
Thank you very much. The negotiations on the future relations between the EU and the UK are more complex than all previous negotiations with global partners. And we know what lies ahead, and it's a shame that both sides are unprepared going into the negotiations. We're still at the state of expressing wishes in domestic battle, and the EU wants to have, on the one side, a good trade agreement, on the other hand, to punish the UK. Today, both sides, neither side has made progress. The UK will remain a state with strong democratic institutions after exit, and a country in which there are millions of Europeans living. And if there's no agreement possible, it's clear either it's because there's no will or the negotiators are incapable.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Reinticke, please. Actually, I'm not sure she's in the chamber, so I will move to our next speaker for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Kirtosh.
I'm simultaneously optimistic and pessimistic about Brexit, Madam Chairman. I think that the UK government has got problems to manage. That's linked with also the history of the Conservative Party. Ms Thatcher was, of course, very concerned about the anti-Europeans. Major was a pro-European, and Cameron didn't really end up being anything at all, and ended up leaving space for anti-European people such as members of UKIP. Now we've got the role being played by Mr Barnier and his colleagues. I think it's a difficult but it's a responsible negotiation that we're carrying out in a very difficult political environment. And I think if we want to put together a proper Europe, Mr Barnier is somebody who can help do that. But I'm also optimistic because I think that the final result might be difficult. I think that the Remain supporters in the United Kingdom don't really have a political voice at the moment. So I think we need to keep an open mind when we talk to our friends from the United Kingdom, because never means never.
Thank you. Mr Danti, 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente, signor Presidente.
Thanks, Madam President. President Juncker, every day that goes by, everything that looked simple actually now looks more and more complicated. When we see the UK, it looks very difficult for them to maintain the privileged position that they had before without undermining Europe. This is becoming clearer and clearer when we look at the question of the single market, where there's no space for some kind of very a la carte measures. So one year on, after the negotiations have already begun, we now really need clear responses from the United Kingdom government. The questions are simple: yes or no to the internal market? Customs union, yes or no? Trade agreement, what kind? We need a definitive response to these questions. That's the presupposition if we're going to come up with a strategy for fruitful cooperation and governing future relations. One thing is clear, Madam President, for Europe, the protection of the integrity of the single market, which took decades to put together, can't be called into question. Thanks very much.
Mr. Nicholson, 1 minute, please. Good timing.
Thank you very much, Madam President. 2 weeks ago, the Commission published its draft withdrawal agreement containing proposals that Northern Ireland at best show a disregard of the Belfast Agreement and the principle of consent. At worst, they read as an attempt to use Brexit to pull Northern Ireland away from the rest of the United Kingdom. Then last week, Leo Varadkar and Donald Tusk chose to dismiss the Prime Minister's reasonable call between Brussels, Dublin and London on border issue. This kind of attitude putting strain on relationships and risks hardening the opinion on all sides. And I would say to Mr Tusk, you are playing high-stakes game with the United Kingdom and with Northern Ireland in particular, but you are in serious danger of overplaying your hand. We want and need solutions that avoid a hard border and respect the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom and the Belfast Agreement. We can only do that if we all work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Hockmark, 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, when our own mini-Trump, Mr Farage, here in this plenary claims that European Union is bullying United Kingdom, it is his way of informing us that he now understands the consequences of Brexit. He understands that when you're leaving the internal market, you're leaving it. When you're leaving the common legislation, you're leaving it. When you're leaving the cooperation for security, you're leaving it. I must say, it doesn't take a mathematician to understand the consequences of that. But he now understands, and now he blames the European Union for his propaganda. That is so Trump you can get. But we need to be more grown-ups than that. European Union, European Parliament, European Commission, we are, of course, a part in the negotiations, but we must be more than that. We must take the responsibility for the Europe as such, for what is best for Europe, for what is best for the United Kingdom in spite of a disoriented government and a political establishment. What is best for the rest of the countries, what is best for all of us regarding economy, financial markets and security. Let's have that in mind. We are not only part in the negotiations, we are responsible for the future of Europe. Thanks.
Thank you. There is a blue card. Will you accept, Mr Hockmark, a blue card? Go ahead, sir.
Mr Hockmark, first of all, thank you very much for taking the blue card. I have one very simple question, which is that on the basis of what you've said, which attracted a great deal of support, will the European Parliament, in your opinion, and I'm asking you to make a prediction, vote in favour of any agreement that is reached between the European Commission, the European Council and the British government? Do you think that the European Parliament will vote in favour of it or vote against it?
Dear colleague, I would like to inform you about democracy. The whole idea of democracy is that things are not decided on before. It is decided when you decide, based upon what you decide upon and based upon what you think about that decision. That is in the United Kingdom, I have understood what is parliamentary system, and that is parliamentary system of this Parliament. Thank you.
1 minute, Mr. Weidenholzer.
Thank you, President. It's not easy to predict how this rather sad Brexit theatre piece is going to end up. Not even for those of us who are more involved, working on this, or those who are concerned. The 3 million EU citizens in the UK and the 1.5 million UK citizens in the European Union. And this is something that's even troubling their sleep. They feel that they are a bargaining chip and that at the end of the process they will not really be taken into account. About 5 million people will are concerned by this, and they have placed their trust in the maintenance of legal standards, and they need clear decisions. They do not want a lack of clarity, and as members of the European Parliament we're going to be doing absolutely everything to ensure that rights are rights and law is law, and our citizens, the ones we represent, need to be better taken into account. And I can't imagine a Brexit deal which will be to the detriment of our citizens, their rights. And here I would agree with very many of the colleagues who've already spoken.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Van de Candelara.
Voorzitter, collega's, het is duidelijk dat elke stap...
Madam President, colleagues, with every step in these negotiations, new issues crop up, and on both the sides of the channel. That applies to those who so far haven't been taken into account enough. Our fishers, the Flemish fishers, are worried they must make new investments but are not getting EU subsidies because of the rules. And one of the important factors for their operation is being questioned because of historical claims when it comes to fishing in UK waters. We don't want fisheries is part of these negotiations, and it's important that in the new relations with the UK that fisheries is the basis of new agreements when it comes to maintaining fish stocks. The fish will continue to swim across the EU-UK border after Brexit, and the safety of Flemish fishers must be safeguarded, and access to UK waters. And there must be a link created between future fisheries agreements and the future relationship with the UK. Otherwise, there is a risk that we will go into troubled waters, and we can't do that to our fishermen.
Voorzitter, we praten vaak over Brexit.
Thank you, Madam President. We're talking about Brexit as if it was a technical thing, but I'd like to stress another aspect. We're talking about people and the impact it'll have on people. After TTIP, we made sure that trade agreements shouldn't end up by diluting community standards and levels of protection. And we need to make certain the same thing applies for any future trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Food standards, environmental standards can't be lowered. We need to make sure that the United Kingdom becomes a trading partner which follows our social standards and doesn't end up carrying out tax or social dumping because European workers will end up the victims of a political decision. When it comes to CETA, we are trying to raise standards, and we need to make certain that Britain is with us if we have a lasting, fruitful relationship for both sides.
Madam President, President of the Commission, Michel Barnier. First of all, I would like to thank the two gentlemen, Juncker and Barnier. In particular, Michel Barnier, whose calm objectivity and seriousness is leading these negotiations. The seriousness seriousness when it comes to the, which is different from that of the UK Prime Minister. She thinks that these negotiations are something quite different. The UK will leave the single market and the customs union, but maintain all benefits. That's excluded. It's impossible. I'd like to bring in a second point. We must use the Brexit experience to develop European democracy. Brexit shows us how the referendum of the Constitutional Treaty and populists and can harm people in your own country and can have collateral damage for the whole EU. 6% of EU citizens out of 580 million have decided that is not democratic. It's not European democracy. It's necessary to discuss that throughout the EU and to develop European democracy further.
Mr. Liberatsky, for 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. President Juncker and Mr. Michel Barnier, perhaps I could link up to some of the comments that we've heard. First of all, the methodological approach, transparency of the whole procedure, and the positive assessment of the work that's been done by Mr. Michel Barnier. These are the kind of areas where there are no doubts or concerns to be expressed by us. Then moving on to the options, the three options for the arrangement, the agreement for the United Kingdom. I think this is quite a far-ranging approach. And then a third comment I'd like to pick up on, Mr. Roberto Gualtieri. He said that, first of all, there is no competent response yet from the British side, but they're only really looking at a pre-movement of goods. But in 1 year, on the 29th of March 2019, Brexit may come about. I'm responsible for road transport issues and what's going to happen on the 30th of March 2019, and where we know that there are so many lorry trips every day. Thank you.
Now, Madam Shaka, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President, President Juncker, Madam Minister and colleagues. Time is running out. The UK government is encouraged and actually urged to make and articulate choices on the future trade relation. Political promises cannot remain vague and contradictory forever. For us, a level playing field is essential. We should not make concessions when it comes to high standards or compromises on the unity of our single market. But it's time for a reality check in London. Special trade privileges are only negotiable when the United Kingdom also accepts overarching rules and standards. Yet the many red lines of the UK only lead to one thing. There will be hurdles and friction when it comes to trade, and that negatively impacts citizens, small, medium-sized enterprises, and of course, many other companies. A solid future relation does not magically emerge on the basis of speeches. I therefore urge Prime Minister May to come up with a realistic proposal about the trade relations she does want for her country after Brexit in relation to the European Union.
Thank you. And now, Madam Reinteke, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As this process unfolds, we can all clearly see what was the biggest lie that was told during the Brexit campaign. It was not a bus that was claiming that there would be £350 million for the NHS. It was not wrong statistics given or wrong representations of the European Union. It was the claim itself that was a lie, taking back control. Because as we see Brexit develop, we see that it does the exact opposite, that millions of citizens, non-British and British EU citizens, are losing control over their rights. They are losing control over the possibilities that they have in their lives. We see the people on the island of Ireland losing control over a peace process which they thought was going into the right direction. And we need to very clearly say that when this is going to unfold, when we are going to lose control, who is going to win of this? It's going to be the bullies. It's going to be the people with no scruple. And this Parliament has to make sure that the good people are not going to lose control, that we stand up for their rights, that we stand up for them having control over their lives, even in this very horrible situation of Brexit. Thank you very much.
Onorevole, passiamo al catch the eye.
Catch the eye now, colleagues. Mr. Myanmar, first of all. Thank you, President. Let me begin by expressing a wish that the EU and the UK will be able to have a future association that's close, balanced and mutually beneficial, which will allow us both in a coordinated way to meet our common challenges. I'd like to stress an issue where we're going to need to cooperate closely in the future, as has already been mentioned by Mr. van den Kendelare. For some time now, EU fishermen have been fishing in the UK's territorial waters and EEZ, and reciprocally UK citizens fishermen fish in EU waters. So we need to have a specific agreement covering fisheries and also the trade in fisheries products. About 66 of UK fish and seafood exports are destined for the European market. I hope these figures continue, but that means reciprocal access to territorial waters needs to be guaranteed. Fish know no borders. Stock management, which has to be carried out jointly, needs to be done together, and fisheries is an area where we need to have constructive future relations, mutually beneficial relations. When it comes to access to waters, access to markets, these are very closely linked together and need to remain so. Thank you, President.
Onorevole López Aguilar.
Mr. López Aguilar.
Yes, thank you, President. 2 years have gone by since the referendum was carried out, which I think was a tragic error. But if we now try and put a brake on the populism, xenophobia here, that's going to be difficult. But I think what we have seen is that despite the complexity, the obscurity that lies behind some certain parts of the debate, European public opinion that doesn't want this seems to have got used to the idea, but that doesn't seem to match with the confusion that's reigning in Great Britain. There's no clarity when it comes to Northern Ireland, to Gibraltar, and Gibraltar voted against Brexit, by way of an aside. But there's a lot of concern when it comes to the trade agreements, aviation agreements with companies with a large amount of British capital. So, Mr. Barnier, we need clarity, resolution, determination. Time is running against us. And the hourglass shows that there isn't much time left for negotiations. We have to really strike now because, as I said, time is running out.
Onorevole Campbell-Bannerman.
Mr. Campbell-Bannerman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say briefly, in this debate, I'm disappointed that none of the realities of the UK leaving have really been touched upon from the EU point of view, such as, for example, the UK will become the largest single market of the EU when we leave, bigger than China, United States, Japan, for example. We have a £75 billion deficit with the EU of your goods, and we employ 1.5 million Germans through cars, etc. And the City of London is very important to funding EU businesses. I've heard none of this today. And what I believe we need is a super Canada deal, one bigger, better and deeper than Canada, which is entirely achievable, and a strategic partnership agreement on foreign affairs and defence and security. And I thank Mr Verhofstadt for his support for the UK, for the dreadful attack on our soil. When it comes to security, we are as one. Thank you.
Onorevole Berder.
Ms. Bearder.
This Brexit government still has no plan on Northern Ireland, no plan for its citizens and no plan for businesses. No clear plan is a dereliction of duty. The Church Times wrote, and I quote, "When a government sees an impending threat to its people in its care, it fails in its duty if it does nothing to remove that threat." Mrs May and her Conservative government are failing in their duty of care to their country. As the so-called party of business, it would appear they have no business plan. You can't run a corner shop without a business plan, let alone a country. The single market has massive benefits, but it also has rules. This resolution is clear about those rules, and it's reasonable to defend them. But whatever the deal might be, we as Liberal Democrats demand the people have a say on it. We here will have a vote. It's likely the Parliament of Wallonia will have a vote. So, or as my hashtag says, give us a say, Mrs May. Thank you, Mr. President.
Onorevole Miranda.
Mr. Miranda.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Mr. Barnier, you know what fisheries is, what cohesion policies are. You know that if the Commission asked us a year ago to have an impact study on European fisheries, and in particularly in the question of Galicia. Galicia is a fisheries country and is affected more by the impact of Brexit, and there's also the impact on the free movement of persons. And there's a migratory flow of young people from my countries to the UK, and we don't know what will be the situation as community citizens. They're in an impasse. It's not just a few, it's more than 40,000 people from Galicia living in the UK. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. President of the Commission, people need to have a sovereign right to decide over their destiny, including when it comes to leaving the European Union. That decision needs to be respected, and the following negotiating process shouldn't have any blackmail or threats in it. Let's remember that the UK's leaving the European Union shouldn't lead to a weakening of other social rights or workers' rights, the right to residence, the right to equal treatment, the right to access to public services like education and health, the portability of social rights and right to family reunification, mutual recognition of academic and professional qualifications. Any future economic or trade agreement between the EU and the UK needs to bear in mind the unique characteristics of the individual member states, and each individual member state needs to have the right to establish relations with the UK in whatever areas its national interest dictates. Thank you. Ms McGuinness.
Thank you, President. I dare say there's a few in this House that put a few bob on the horses, and we should acknowledge that Cheltenham Festival is today. And there might be a few people there discussing Brexit, because actually Brexit will damage the horse racing industry because it relies on EU rules. And I dare say Mr Farage might be interested in that. And this is a huge concern for punters, for breeders, for trainers, and we need to find a solution. Can I also address Prime Minister Theresa May directly when she spoke in her speech about a precious union of the United Kingdom? I get that, I fully understand it. But can I say that the European Union is also precious, but not in the way that sometimes precious is perceived. It's important, it's vital, and therefore that's why we defend it. And can I say that one of the big hurdles we face, with the racing metaphor, is that of the border with Northern Ireland. Jim Nicholson has left the chamber, but he's a wise man, and he, in my view, is a bridge between the extremes of Sinn Féin and the DUP. Perhaps we should listen to him. Thank you.
Onorevole Howard.
Mr. Howitt.
Mr. President, as the resolution recognises, the logical consequences of the UK Conservative government's red lines are customs checks and delays at Dover and elsewhere, which will seriously impact the supply chains of UK businesses, but also businesses in the EU 27. Theresa May's red lines have boxed the UK into a corner with a free trade agreement now the only option. This will be damaging for the EU and a disaster for the United Kingdom. Whitehall's own assessment of the impact makes for bleak reading. If the UK ends up with only a free trade agreement, it can expect a GDP drop of 5% nationally, including in my South East constituency, and under WTO rules that the likes of UKIP want, that would be even worse. None of this seems to bother the UK Conservatives, who seem to have abandoned UK business entirely. But it will not be their wealthy chums who suffer from this. It will be ordinary people. It's high time this government dropped its red lines and negotiated with an open mind.
Ultimo intervento, onorevole Gericke.
Final speaker, Ms. Gericke.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender. Wir diskutieren hier.
President, today we're discussing guidelines for the future relationship between the European Union and the UK, which is very important. But I'd just like to say that when I go back home to the market or I'm sitting around the table in the local bar, people don't discuss, they don't sort of say, well, you know, how are things going to be getting on in the future with the UK? What people are expecting of the Commission is the solution for the European Union of 27 member states in the future, and more specifically, a financial solution. And people are quite clear on this when they're not going to pay 1 cent more. They feel they're already paying enough. That message doesn't seem to be getting across to Brussels. There is a Brexit gap between 4 or 5 billion a year that would have to be paid extra a year, according to Mr. Oettinger. And we're still paying more than we get, so 13 billion more. So 13 plus 4 is 17 billion, and it's about 208 euro per capita. So I think we really have to find a solution for the budget. We're discussing guidelines we ought to be discussing guidelines as well about the EU and its relationships with its citizens.